Okay, let's jump right in. WWDC 2025 has just wrapped up, and beyond the usual feature announcements, there's something fundamentally different about the feel of Apple's software this year.
Yeah,
It's not just what you can do, but how it looks and interacts with you.
that's the striking thing, isn't it? It's a sweeping visual change, potentially the biggest aesthetic shakeup to the core interface in, well, nearly a decade, maybe even more.
And that's exactly what we're doing a deep dive into today. Apple's brand new design language, liquid glass.
Mm-hmm.
The stack of sources you've shared here really highlights it as like the most significant visual overhaul since the flat design era of iOS 7.
And unlike past updates that might focus on just one platform, the mission with Liquid Glass seems to be unification. It's not confined to the iPhone.
Right.
The plan is for it to roll out across the entire Apple ecosystem: iOS 26, iPadOS 26, macOS 26 Tahoe, watchOS 26, tvOS 26, and even updates to visionOS 26.
So our mission in this deep dive is to take these sources and really unpack this liquid glass. What is it? Why did Apple do it? How does it actually work under the hood?
Yeah, and the reaction to
And what's
it.
the initial reaction been?
Jack.
By the end of this, you should have a really clear picture of this major aesthetic shift and why it matters.
Yeah.
Let's unpack this. So Apple is calling this liquid glass a new software-based material. What does that actually mean in practice?
Well, they're describing it as combining the optical properties of glass with a sense of fluidity. Think of it less as a static layer and more as a translucent fluid material that conceptually sits like above the user interface. It's meant to feel dynamic, almost physically present.
A software layer that acts like real glass.
Mm-hmm.
What are the key visual characteristics that define this material?
The core is that blend of translucency and fluidity. It mimics the look of real glass, but it's also highly dynamic.
Right.
It adapts in real time to the content underneath it and the specific context you're in. The sources talk a lot about real-time rendering of light effects, showing sophisticated refraction and reflection of the elements below it.
And there's that detail about specular highlights,
Yeah.
the ones that respond to interaction.
Yeah, that's a key visual cue. Elements like app icons and the dock are described as having multiple layers of liquid glass that create stunning specular highlights in depth.
Okay.
These highlights weren't static. They react as you interact or even, tilt the device. Adds to that sense of realism and depth.
It sounds like they want the interface to feel incredibly responsive and, well, integrated with the hardware itself. What's the ultimate goal Apple is aiming for with this look?
The stated aim is to make interfaces more expressive, intuitively navigable, and visually harmonious with the physical devices. They want the software to feel like a natural extension of the hardware it's running on.
All right, we know what it looks like. But design isn't just aesthetics, right? There's usually a guiding philosophy. What principles are underpinning liquid glass?
Yeah, the updated Human Interface Guidelines, the HIG, they lay out several core principles driving this. First, there's hierarchy. So controls are designed to sit above your content like a functional glass layer.
Okay, makes sense. Clear separation.
Exactly. It distinguishes interactive elements. Then harmony, which is all about achieving a unified visual theme, making it look and feel consistent across all Apple devices.
Right.
Then consistency, obviously, ensuring that unified experience scales and works predictably, regardless of screen size or device type.
Okay.
And finally, content-first design. This is really evident in things like navigation elements, which dynamically recede.
Like those shrinking tab bars.
Exactly, like the shrinking tab bars to elevate what's in front of you, putting your content front and center, maximizing space.
With something so, well, translucent and dynamic, why are these principles like hierarchy and content first especially crucial here? It seems like it could get messy otherwise.
It's the guardrail, absolutely. Without strong principles, an interface with inherent translucency and dynamism could quickly become cluttered, visually busy, or just harder to read.
Yeah, I can see that.
So these principles are essential to ensuring the visual complexity doesn't come at the cost of usability.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
It needs structure. Where did Apple draw inspiration for this new direction? visionOS seems like a really significant source.
Oh, absolutely. The sources point to visionOS as the most significant influence. Liquid Glass apparently takes heavy cues from visionOS, and it adapts those 3D spatial concepts, depth, layers, translucency for traditional 2D screens.
Right.
And this is definitely a strategic move, you could argue, perhaps designed to subtly condition users and developers too.
For a future with more AR and spatial computing, like getting us used to it.
Exactly. It feels like a stepping stone.
So it's kind of paving the way. Are there any other echoes from Apple's design history in here? Or is it totally new?
Well, you can definitely see resemblances to the blur effects that first appeared way back in iOS 7.
Okay, yeah.
And some elements might remind you a bit of the glossiness of the old macOS Aqua interface, maybe?
Oh, Aqua! Wow, blast from the past.
Right. And it feels like an evolution of motion effects we saw in things like the iPhone X and the dynamic island. So it builds on Apple's own design evolution, but with that strong new vector pointing towards visionOS.
This really is positioned as a massive system-wide change then.
Okay.
The sources even call it Apple's broadest design update ever. That's a big claim.
That emphasis on broadest ever really underscores the ambition here. A truly unified design language that delivers a consistent experience across the entire ecosystem, making every device feel fresh, but also deeply connected.
Okay, let's get into some specifics. How does liquid glass actually manifest on the iPhone with iOS 26? What changes?
Okay, so on iOS, icons get a noticeable change, a more curved look, apparently, and the option for an all-new clear look. So personalization seems to be a theme.
Clear icons. Interesting.
Yeah. And controls, like buttons and switches, they become dynamic elements that morph based on what you're doing. More alive, less static.
Tell me more about those shrinking tab bars you mentioned. That sounds like a core interaction change, not just looks.
They're a prime example of that content-first design philosophy. Tab bars shrink automatically as you scroll.
Right.
Then they fluidly expand back when you scroll up. This dynamic behavior isn't just cosmetic. It's really about maximizing screen real estate for your content in apps like News or Safari.
Okay, makes sense. And the lock screen changes also sound really unique.
They do sound pretty cool. The clock dynamically reshapes itself. It's designed to nestle behind subjects in your photos. And even standard 2D photos can apparently gain a delightful 3D effect that responds to device movement, adding depth where there wasn't any before.
Like a parallax effect, but maybe more sophisticated.
Seems like it, yeah. And album artwork interaction with playback controls is another area where this dynamism comes into play. More visual feedback.
Did the camera app get a tweak too?
Yes. A simplified user interface is mentioned, focused on quick swipes between modes, making it faster to use, maybe.
Okay.
And system elements like notifications and control center adopt the translucent aesthetic too. Although it's worth noting some early feedback mentioned that the control center transparency can sometimes feel a bit overbearing.
Ah, okay. Potentially usability issue there.
Could be. Dynamic alerts and context menus also get the refresh treatment.
Okay. Shifting gears to the iPad with iPadOS 26. What's the liquid glass story there? Is it just the same as iOS?
iPadOS fully embraces liquid glass, maybe even more so in some ways. Icons are more rounded, similar to iOS.
Right.
But the sidebars in apps like Mail or Files are redesigned, and they now have this refractive quality. They refract content behind them while reflecting your wallpaper.
Oh, wow. So you see the content through the sidebar, but distorted.
Kind of, yeah. And reflecting the wallpaper adds another layer. But for the iPad, the functional updates seem just as significant as the visual ones, maybe more so.
That's what I was thinking, the windowing system.
Exactly, that's the big one. And they're clearly tied into making the iPad a more capable productivity tool. Crucially, there's an intuitive windowing system for seamless resizing and placement of apps,
Excellent.
designed to make it act more like a MacBook. And get this, when you connect a keyboard, you even get an actual pointy mouse pointer, not the circle.
Whoa, okay. A real pointer. That is a big deal for the iPad as laptop argument.
It really is. This feels like a clear, strategic push visually and functionally, positioning the iPad as a genuine laptop replacement. Liquid glass provides the visual unification.
Okay, makes sense. Moving to the desktop then. macOS 26 Tahoe. How does it apply there?
So macOS applies the liquid glass aesthetic to its interface elements too. The desktop and dock get updated widgets and icons with new tint or clear options similar to iOS. A standout change, though, is the transparent menu bars. Apple says these are designed to make the display feel significantly larger.
Interesting. Blending into the background more.
Seems like the idea. Spotlight gets enhancements for quick actions, apparently, and sidebars become refractive, mirroring that iPadOS design cue. Consistency again.
So it truly is ecosystem-wide then, touching even the smaller platforms.
That's the stated goal, yeah. The watchOS 26 gets the look. tvOS 26 features more immersive panels using the aesthetic, and CarPlay receives a matching visual refresh.
CarPlay 2, what changes there?
Revamped home screen, translucent elements, live activities widgets right there on the screen, tap-back replies, and less intrusive call notifications, apparently.
Okay.
Even visionOS 26 sees updates like persistent anchored widgets, adopting some of these principles. So yeah, it's broad.
Looking at the table in one of the sources, Table 1, I think, it really lays out just how many platforms get the core look, those translucent icons, dynamic controls, persistent widgets.
Yeah, it shows the sheer scale of this rollout, but it also highlights where platform-specific needs lead to unique features, which is interesting.
Like what?
Well, you see the shrinking tab bars mainly on iOS iPadOS. The refractive sidebars are across multiple platforms, but key for macOS and iPadOS. The adaptive lock screen is unique to iOS.
Right.
The transparent menu bar is macOS only. And that really significant windowing system and the pointy pointer, well, that's unique, for now at least, to iPadOS.
Okay. This visual richness, this real-time rendering, it sounds like it must require significant horsepower. What's powering it under the hood?
That's the key insight, really. Liquid Glass is intrinsically linked to the hardware. The sources state it takes advantage of the improved hardware available in Apple's latest A18 and A18 Pro chips.
The newest ones.
And the powerful M-series chips in Macs and iPads. It's explicitly optimized for Apple Silicon devices requiring the necessary processing power to render those complex effects, the light refraction, the dynamic specular highlights in real time.
Making them feel immediate and natural, not laggy.
Exactly. That's crucial for the illusion.
Apple often talks about the tight integration between their hardware and software teams. Did they frame Liquid Glass that way? Like,
Right.
Only we can do this.
Oh, they did. Apple highlighted the close cooperation of its hardware and software teams, and even claimed Liquid Glass would work seamlessly across all hardware generations.
Okay. But immediately, the sources introduced the reality check. Devices are being left behind. That seamlessly seems optimistic.
Exactly. It's a classic Apple claim versus reality moment. Despite the talk of seamlessness, a notable list of older devices will not be getting these updates.
Which ones for iOS 26 are getting dropped? Do we know?
Yes. For iOS 26, it's the iPhone XS, XS Max, and XR. Those came out in 2018. So anything older than the iPhone 11 series is out for this OS update.
Okay. And for macOS 26 Tahoe,
Yeah.
that seemed even more significant.
It is, arguably. macOS 26 Tahoe drops support for certain 2020 Intel machines, specifically the MacBook Air and Mac Mini from that year, and the older iMac Pro.
Wow, 2020 isn't that old.
Yeah. And the sources explicitly state that this is the last macOS version that will support any Intel Mac. Full stop.
The end of an era for Intel Macs then. And the cited reason for these drop-offs being that the older hardware would just struggle with Liquid Glass.
Yes, the explanation given is that older hardware would likely struggle with Liquid Glass and its visual demands, particularly that real-time rendering aspect. It needs the grunt.
So the core insight here is, Liquid Glass isn't just a pretty face. It's a powerful lever. It seems designed to push users towards upgrading to Apple Silicon hardware.
That appears to be a very deliberate part of the strategy, yes.
Yeah.
By making the desirable new look tied to newer hardware, Apple provides a strong, visible incentive to upgrade. It directly links software appeal to hardware sales and definitely accelerates that transition away from Intel.
And it's not just about which devices are supported overall, right? Even among the supported devices, there's a kind of tiered experience being created.
That's a really crucial detail, yeah. While Liquid Glass itself might be available across a wider range of supported hardware, all Apple Intelligence features, the new AI capabilities they announced require the very latest premium hardware. So the iPhone 15 Pro Max or the upcoming iPhone 16 models.
Oh, okay.
So even within the supported ecosystem, the full next-generation experience, the AI plus the new look, is gated to the newest and most powerful devices, creates clear tiers.
What does this mean for developers then? People trying to build apps that actually fit this new aesthetic. Is Apple helping them?
Yeah, they're providing the tools. They're pushing developers towards their native frameworks, claiming SwiftUI provides everything they need.
Okay.
They've also introduced new APIs across SwiftUI, UIKit, and AppKit to make adoption supposedly straightforward. The goal is clearly for developers to create apps that are more expressive and delightful while being instantly familiar within this Liquid Glass world.
Right. Make the whole ecosystem look consistent.
Exactly. They even tied this effort to their foundation models framework, which is interesting, highlighting the integration between the visual layer and the underlying AI capabilities.
Are they helping with specific tools too, like for making those new icons?
Yes, Icon Composer is mentioned as a specific tool to help developers create icons that align with the new look and maintain that visual consistency across platforms.
Okay. Now, with such a focus on visuals, translucency, dynamism, accessibility has to be a key consideration. How is Apple addressing that? Because it seems like it could be tricky.
It's definitely tricky. They've built in specific accessibility features, calling them modifiers on the material. These are designed to adapt the liquid glass effects for users who need them.
What kind of modifiers?
Well, there's reduced transparency, which makes elements frostier, more opaque, essentially to obscure more content behind them and improve legibility.
Okay, that makes sense.
Then there's increased contrast, which renders elements predominantly black or white and highlights them with a contrasting border, again, for clarity.
Right.
And reduced motion, which decreases the intensity of visual effects and disables things like the jiggly dynamic properties for users sensitive to movement.
These sound necessary, absolutely. But the sources raised a pretty significant concern about how enabling them actually impacts the look and feel.
That's the tension, yeah. There's some pretty critical feedback noting that enabling these accessibility options can make the OS look so much worse as a result.
Ouch.
One quote even said it could basically turn it into the current iOS, but worse, which is not ideal.
So hang on. If the visually appealing default, the whole point of liquid glass isn't inherently accessible for everyone.
Right.
And turning on accessibility features significantly degrades that intended look. Doesn't that basically create a two-tiered experience? Like a good-looking version and an accessible but ugly version.
That's the core philosophical challenge raised by the critique, absolutely. If the much-hyped visual magic of liquid glass is diminished or lost entirely when you need accessibility features, it kind of undermines the goal of providing a truly delightful and inclusive experience for all users. It's a real balancing act.
Yeah, that's a tricky one. Okay, let's zoom out a bit and compare liquid glass to other design trends. The immediate comparison that seems to jump out for many people is Windows Aero.
Oh, yeah. That comparison is almost unavoidable. People see the glass-like transparencies, the glossy icons, the translucent borders.
Right.
And immediately think of Windows Vista and Windows 7's Aero interface from the, mid-2000s?
Exactly. So is Apple just reviving a dated idea? Is that the criticism?
Well, many sources argue that Apple is just doing it all better. They point to the power of modern hardware, specifically Apple Silicon.
Right, the performance.
Enabling smoother, more dynamic, and frankly more convincing effects than Aero could ever achieve back then. Liquid glass is described as much better at emulating real glass, as the liquid glass effects are dynamic rather than static, compared to Aero's more static appearance.
So it moves and reacts more.
Supposedly, yeah. But does that comparison still give it a hint of being dated for some people?
That's what I was wondering. Does it feel old-fashioned to some?
It certainly does seem to. For some, the comparison evokes nostalgia, which might be positive. But for others, it definitely makes liquid glass feel rooted in the mid-seasons. A bit retro, maybe not in a good way for everyone.
Okay. What about more contemporary comparison? How does it stack up against, say, Google's Material 3 Expressive? That's the Android direction.
Yeah, that comparison is fascinating because they seem to be going in quite different directions, actually.
Okay.
Google's Material 3 Expressive, which we're expecting more of in Android 16, is described as fun and colorful. It seems to focus on bold color palettes and deep personalization options.
Right. Material taken further.
Exactly. Liquid glass, in contrast, leans heavily into that translucent and reflective design interface, taking its cues from Vision OS and the interplay of light and shadow. Much less about bold color, more about texture and depth. Visually, liquid glass is often seen as a way bigger design overhaul. It looks dramatically different. However, some argue Material 3 Expressive might actually be a larger user interface upgrade in terms of interaction, changes to behavior, more nuanced haptic feedback, making it feel perhaps more responsive in a different way.
So LG looks more different, but M3E might do more differently.
That's one perspective, yeah. Some see liquid glass more as a, quote, fresh coat of paint visually, while M3E digs deeper into interaction patterns.
And the technical difference in how they handle translucency. Is there one?
Yes. Material 3 Expressive often uses a heavy blur effect to suggest depth behind translucent elements. Liquid glass aims for a clearer transparency, which, as some critics note, can be visually distracting when many layers overlap. You might see too much detail through it.
Ah, okay. trade-offs there.
And there's also that really insightful analyst observation. Material 3 Expressive is designed to run on phones, whereas liquid glass is made for what might replace them.
Ooh, interesting. Hinting at AR/VR again.
Exactly. It frames liquid glass firmly in the context of preparing for future spatial devices, reinforcing that Vision OS connection.
That's a sharp distinction. So given these comparisons and the dramatic shift, what has the overall reception been like? Has it been universally loved or not so much?
Absolutely not universally loved. The initial reception has been quite polarized, really. Strong reactions on both sides.
Okay, let's hear the good stuff first. What are the high points people are praising?
Well, it's been called beautiful, delightful, and elegant, a striking new look. Some reviewers feel it gives iOS a much-needed dose of personality, describing the icons as looking like tiny jewels, that kind of thing. The dynamism and fluidity make things feel more fluid and alive, a genuinely refreshing new design for many.
Right, the wow factor and the criticisms. Where are people pushing back hard?
Well, significant concerns about readability are very common. It's been called harder to read at a glance, and in some much harsher terms, even sensory hell.
Sensory hell, wow.
Yeah, due to potential visual clutter when layers and effects combine, or just the distracting nature of that clear translucency over busy backgrounds. Some just find it busy and obnoxious. And that comparison to Aero gives it a dated feel for some critics. There are some really blunt comments like, it looks cheap F.
Wouch.
And as we discussed earlier, the accessibility issues where enabling necessary features makes it look so much worse, that's a major point of criticism too. Plus, there are the technical concerns like potential performance hits and battery impact, dismissed by some critics as a gratuitous waste of resources.
Although others argue modern hardware handles it just fine.
Right, there's debate there, and then there's the more cynical view that it's all just a shiny skin or a distraction.
It's a distraction from what?
To shift focus away from perceived delays or shortcomings in Apple's AI advancements compared to competitors.
Okay. That ties into some analyst comments we saw. What did they highlight about the timing of this big visual change?
Analyst Dipanjan Chatterjee specifically pointed out the timing, suggesting that UI changes alone can't truly fill an AI void. You need the substance, too.
Makes sense.
And Francisco Geronimo characterized WWDC 2025 overall as an event of careful calibration rather than disruptive innovation, more polish than revolution. And there's even speculation that the redesign is being used, perhaps intentionally or maybe just conveniently, to hide imperfections or distract from delays in other areas, like AI.
Okay, let's pull back again and look at the bigger picture. Why is liquid glass such a crucial strategic move for Apple, beyond just looking nice or distracting people?
Well, fundamentally, it reinforces Apple's core strength, that deep vertical integration.
Hardware and software together.
Exactly. By being built for and optimized specifically for Apple Silicon, liquid glass enables visual effects and a level of responsiveness that competitors, who often rely on more fragmented hardware and software ecosystems, simply cannot replicate. It ties the desirable user experience directly to Apple's control over its entire stack.
Which then, as you said, drives hardware upgrades.
Precisely. By making this appealing new aesthetic either exclusive to or significantly better on newer hardware, Apple creates a very compelling visual incentive for users to upgrade their devices.
Right. I want my phone to look like that.
Exactly. This directly fuels the demand for their latest Apple Silicon products, making liquid glass a powerful engine for their hardware upgrade cycle.
And you mentioned its connection to the AR/VR future several times. That seems key.
That's perhaps the most forward-looking strategic piece, yeah. It's really seen by many analysts as a clear bridge to Apple's AR ambitions.
How so?
The interface's reliance on depth, layering, translucency, and dynamic scaling, all these elements mirror the spatial computing concepts required for AR glasses or headsets. It's subtly training users to expect immersive experiences tomorrow, acclimatizing them to the look and feel they might encounter in future spatial interfaces from Apple.
Getting our eyes and brains ready for it. And those rumors of an all-glass iPhone, do they fit into this narrative?
They could, potentially. There are these persistent rumors of a future glass-wing iPhone, maybe around 2027, made primarily of glass.
Right.
The liquid glass UI could be seen as a software precursor to that, where the operating system will influence the look of new hardware, creating an even more seamless, integrated physical-digital object, where software and hardware truly blend.
Interesting thought. How does all of this impact that famous Apple ecosystem stickiness? Does it make it harder to leave?
Well, the intended fluidity and interactivity are designed to feel more intuitive, maybe reducing cognitive load and making the experience feel effortless. This naturally fosters deeper stickiness.
Yeah.
The sources argue it makes the switching costs higher than ever. When all your devices, phone, tablet, Mac, watch, share this consistent, arguably delightful experience powered by this integrated design, moving away from any one part of that ecosystem becomes more jarring and less appealing. The cross-platform consistency and the unified developer tools required to build these apps only amplify that network effect. It pulls you in deeper.
So, circling back to that question, is liquid glass a brilliant strategic move or just a shiny distraction from other things?
That really seems to be the core debate, doesn't it? Some see it as brilliant timing, setting the stage for future hardware like AR, reinforcing core ecosystem strengths.
Right.
Others see the timing, particularly amidst perceived AI slowdowns relative to competitors, as strategic in a different way, a visually impressive shift designed to distract or at least give the feeling of major progress where perhaps the functional leaps aren't as big this year.
It's possible it serves both purposes to some extent.
I think that's very likely, yeah. It can be strategically smart and serve as a bit of a visual distraction simultaneously.
So while liquid glass presents this beautiful, ambitious vision deeply integrated with Apple's hardware strategy, it clearly comes with some potential challenges and pitfalls.
Yes, definitely. Usability is paramount. Those concerns we talked about regarding legibility, particularly with complex backgrounds showing through the translucency, and the risk of the interface just feeling busy, or even that sensory hell. For some users, those are significant hurdles Apple needs to overcome for broad acceptance. It can't just look good, it has to work well.
And the accessibility trade-offs we discussed are genuinely concerning.
They absolutely are. If users who need accessibility features are forced into a visually inferior or degraded experience, it really undermines the design's goals and frankly alienates a segment of the user base. Apple needs to ensure the accessible versions don't feel like an afterthought or a punishment.
Is there also a potential learning curve with all these dynamic elements?
That's true. While Apple always aims for instantly familiar, dynamic elements that shrink, morph, or refract require users to learn new visual cues and interactions. How easily users discover and understand these behaviors, what designers call discoverability, will be really key.
If it's not obvious how it works, it's frustrating.
Exactly. And finally, ensuring consistent performance across all the supported hardware, not just the latest and greatest M whatever chip. That's vital for user satisfaction. While it's optimized for the newest silicon, if the experience is laggy or significantly impacts battery life on older but still officially supported devices, it creates that experiential peer we mentioned, where the full magic of liquid glass is only truly realized if you buy the most expensive new hardware. That could breed resentment.
So to wrap up this deep dive then, liquid glass is clearly a bold visual evolution for Apple. It's deeply tied to their hardware strategy, it's designed to unify the entire ecosystem, and it's potentially building a bridge to an AR future. But the initial reception is definitely mixed, highlighting both real excitement and some significant concerns about usability, accessibility, and performance.
Yeah, its ultimate success will likely depend on several key factors. How enthusiastically developers actually adopt the new design language in their apps.
Right, third-party apps need to look right too.
Exactly. Whether Apple can ensure consistent, smooth, lag-free performance across the whole supported device spectrum, not just the flagships, and maybe most importantly, how effectively they address those usability and accessibility issues that have been raised so quickly by early reviewers and users.
It feels like such a huge investment in the visual layer, just the pure aesthetics of it all.
It really does. And perhaps, maybe that significant visual investment inadvertently puts even more pressure on Apple to deliver equally groundbreaking functional innovations, especially in areas like AI in the near future.
It sets a higher bar.
It sets a high bar for what a next-generation experience should look and feel like, yeah. If the look is this advanced, the function needs to keep pace.
It's also worth considering, just as a final thought for you listening, how this huge effort to create a consistent, fluid, almost ambient experience across all your Apple devices might just deepen that ecosystem, lock in even further. By making the multi-device experience feel like one single, seamless, interconnected environment, it could make the prospect of leaving for another platform or mixing platforms seem that much more disruptive and less appealing than ever before.
A fascinating thought to consider as you start seeing liquid glass roll out onto your devices.